welcome. I just really want to just talk about a couple of projects that I've been developing. I just wanted to mention Neil's really good comment about values of the muscles and that need to be exercised. And I think that's really good in the context of dance, and which I'm going to talk about. Just to say that I'm the director of Cushcane Broadreach, and the artistic director of Cushcane Dance Theatre is David Bolger, and we're based in Dublin. And I'm a dancer, facilitator, choreographer and teacher. And in my various practices and roles, I work with many different communities in all kinds of places and settings. Now, let me see if I can just start this... Sorry, how do you start this? To the right. Just to the right, okay. Great, okay. Particularly, I'm interested in why people dance, what motivates them, and where people choose, dream, or desire to dance, and how people dance and move as they age in different spaces and places. So where does hospitality fit into this? And what does hospitality mean in practice and in reality, and in the context of the projects that I coordinate and develop, and in the context of how we age? And a huge part of my work has been to develop a program with people aged 50 plus, and that's a kind of quite a difficult title as well. You know, we talked about older people, we talk about elder people, elders, but it's a name that we chose to use as the best way to describe a huge different group. So before I talk about two initiatives, a partnership project with Dublin City Council and an intergenerational project for women called 38 Women, there's a few things on the theme of hospitality that I feel are valid to state in terms of my own practice. I think of hospitality is something that's active, that's physical, that's personal, and deeply rooted in the body. In a sense, it's a living, breathing, moving exchange. It's a shared interaction between people. And it's an interaction, I think, that changes, and it changes over time. So I think hospitality plays a central role, well, I know it does, in how I engage with people. When I or they open the door for the first time, being hospitable is the first action. In a sense, it's offering a cup of tea, inviting people in to sit somewhere comfortable, and it's essential before we get going. It establishes the relationship between us. So I believe hospitality is important to any form of cultural and social connection. But is hospitality always that easy? And I suppose what happens when one person is more vulnerable or less able than the other? Or if one community is at a disadvantage from another? Is hospitality so readily available to all, particularly in dance and dancing? Is it, as we age, does hospitality perhaps become more difficult? Does it require us to have and maintain physical confidence, emotional confidence, confidence in our bodies? Confidence in ourselves as people going out? And do spaces and places and communities perhaps, as others have mentioned, become less accessible, less welcoming, more difficult to negotiate, practically, physically, emotionally? And certainly in terms of dancing and dance, in my experience, I feel they sometimes do become more difficult to negotiate or even to enter. Sometimes simply they're just too crowded, or perhaps the acoustics are problematic. So there are lots of issues there with people coming into a space or coming into a community and dancing together and socializing together that I think are difficult to negotiate. So how do I, or we, deal with this how do I deal with it in terms of my own practice as a dancer? These photographs, by the way, are of two projects that I'm talking about, or two different initiatives. So the answer, I suppose, to some of those questions, or not all of them, is to develop opportunities that offer people of many and any ages, not just as we age, but all throughout our life, choice. A choice essentially in who people dance with, how, where and when they participate. Within my own work as part of Broadreach, the two projects I mentioned, they stand out because I feel in some way they embrace ideas on the one hand of creating hospitable communities and the other of transformation and creating hospitable spaces through artistic practice. So from 2008 to 2015, as part of Cushcane Broadreach, we developed a partnership with Dublin City Council, Arts, Sports and Leisure and Community Development sectors to lead an annual Bealtaine class and performance project for people aged 50 plus. And each year, the projects employed slightly different models, but essentially they involved classes taking place in different community centres in the 5 electoral areas of Dublin City, and they culminated in one or more free public performance by participants during the Bealtaine Festival. And over the years, the participants, many of whom returned again and again, have performed in some wonderful and illustrious kind of Dublin city centre venues, such as City Hall, Imma, the Mansion House, and so on. And in this, Dublin City Council's role were key in enabling access to these spaces. And from 2011 to 2013, after much talk with the performers themselves and the organisers and ourselves within Broadreach and within Cushcane, we felt that it was time to go beyond those places themselves, but to go back out to the communities where classes had taken place, to try and engage and deepen our connections with the communities, to make, in a sense, to become more hospitable in our exchange, in sharing the experiences, and sharing the dance practice with the communities where people themselves lived. So in a sense, like trying to get back out to those sports centres, community centres, leisure centres, as well as the big, fantastic buildings, which everybody loved to dance in. But it was like trying to kind of find a way where we can deepen those links with those communities. And this was, I suppose this was pushed forward by the participants themselves. It wasn't just something that we decided. It was really through conversation with people returning. So the dance ensemble that formed of 30 or 40 people who chose to perform and chose to dance went on the road, performing in all these different centres. It was very memorable and it was hugely enjoyable, although not without difficulties. Artistically and choreographically and from an embodied perspective, encouraging people to create and practice together, to create performances, to hold, to touch, to support each other, to take part in contemporary dance practice, which is the practice that I do, to take that step, to lean against each other, to dance in different ways and to use space in different ways was sometimes difficult to negotiate, and it had its challenges. And this is not a kind of dance form that a lot of people are familiar with. And so that was a really exciting, but it was also, it had its difficulties. Negotiating and being on the road and negotiating different places with a large number of people, aged somewhere between 50 to 85, had its challenges. Where do they all change into costume? Are the toilets wheelchair accessible? Can we make tea for the performers as well as for the audience? What time will the building open and close? All these small details were key in the project, and understanding how to negotiate and work with different halls and different spaces and places and people. Chairs were a constant feature, and they were a huge priority, allowing performers to sit and dance together. But this necessitated twice as many chairs. Folding chairs were no good. Bar stools were no good. Chairs with armrests were too cumbersome. Chairs had to be stable and easy to lift. They needed to move to accommodate the choreography or become part of the choreography. And they had to support different bodies, different types of bodies, shapes, abilities, sizes, and yes, of age. But what was noticeable was that hospitality, and perhaps taking a hospitable approach, and in this sharing and exchanging, was absolutely key to the success of this complex initiative. In making it all work, it relied heavily upon sharing and access, sharing resources, facilities, time, space, sharing partner organisations, between partner organisations, guest and host communities, between venues and audience and performer. And most of all, it relied on the shared effort between the performers themselves, building a kind of cohesive community. So in this sense, I believe these kind of quality dance projects, perhaps built on embodied and shared experience, support the possibility of growing hospitable communities as we age. And in some sense combating social and cultural isolation and enabling people to communicate in different ways and taking part and participating in different places and spaces. The other project I like to mention, which are these pictures, is an intergenerational performance project that involved over 30 women aged between 20 and 75. This was entitled 38 Women, and it took place at the National Museum of Decorative Arts at Collins Barracks. And I think there are two things that are important here. One is the actual space and how space informed the artistic process. And the other is the idea, the very real thing of an intergenerational approach of enabling people of different ages to come together and to collaborate and to work collectively, and how the space kind of informed and facilitated the artistic process in that sense. So this considers how working together, it allowed them to work in this collective experience. It was part of a parallel engagement program for Cushcame Anu's collaborative production called These Rooms that ran from October to December 2016. And the title, 38 Women, draws from the 38 women who had witnessed a particular harrowing atrocity during the Easter Rising in 1916, which was explored in more detail in These Rooms. Being at the National Museum of Decorative Arts in Collins Barracks was an incredible experience, and the museum as a repository for the nation's stories was a hugely apt venue. It is of note that we were able to develop 38 Women because a major cultural institution opened its doors and welcomed us in, together with Anu, the theatre company, whose rehearsal space it was. So in a sense, they really allowed us in to use the space as we wished. this invitation allowed us to create a safe and secure environment, a creative environment, which in turn gave us license to experiment, to imagine, to practice as we wished, and really without constraint. And that was an extraordinary kind of privilege, but it was a unique moment. And it's not something that I've experienced very, very often. 38 Women in Brief explored the notion of bearing witness by women and the idea that, as psychotherapist Katharina Lay suggests, we live by the stories we have about our lives. They shape our lives. Specific to this was the embodied nature of the experience held by the female participants and the relevance to these experiences had to their own locations and place. So 100 years ago, in 1916, the barracks rooms that we worked in housed British soldiers. In 2016, this group of 38 women, or 30, in actual fact 34 women, aged between 20 and 75, entered the rooms, which were still largely untouched, to create dance theatre. And for 10 weeks, every Saturday, we inhabited those spaces. We pushed against the walls, we slid across the floors, we jumped and we danced, we climbed stairs, we sat and we talked, we sang and we joked, we lifted and carried each other and huddled together, and we ran through the spaces, or we walked, or we wandered slowly through the spaces. But we did this freely. And my directive within this was simple. Work in smaller groups. Choose a space within one of the rooms to reimagine your collective story. What do you have in common, and what makes your story unique? Consider this actual space that you are present in Collins Barracks, and also the place in which the story is situated, and what is the meeting point between the two. And use whatever art forms you wish to articulate and express your experience. Explore how you use your bodies, choreography, movement to reimagine the spaces to tell your story. And it was a really terrifically dynamic journey. Gradually, as the spaces started to change, as rooms were decorated or altered, there was this sense of the experience of the place changing for us. And for the performance of 38 women, the audience were invited in and guided through the different and now altered spaces as one story after another unfolded. The audience watched and listened, and sometimes in close proximity or at a distance, in shadow or in bright light. They stood, they sat, they leaned. Sometimes they waited or moved alongside the performers. The audience, in a sense, became participants and witnesses as new stories took shape in these spaces. And in this sense, through ownership, through this creative dance activity and embodied expressive performances, the spaces themselves were transformed from empty shells to, I believe, something more alive and welcoming. And they became, in a sense, places of mutual support, of shared exchange and dialogue between people of different ages, backgrounds, different cultures, between the past and present, between men and women. And I believe in this way, through this multifaceted process, they became altogether kind of more hospitable spaces. So just to kind of finish off, for a long time, through the people I've got to know, people have often spoken to me about how they've enjoyed dancing and performing in all these different places and spaces. They've spoken where they used to dance in Dublin, where 10, 20, 40, 50 years ago, where they want to dance, the places that have a memory for them that's special because they've danced in those spaces. And not long ago, somebody who comes regularly to different performances, the Broadreach performances, told me that she loves coming to these performances because they take her into unexpected places, literally into buildings that either she had never been into before, for one reason or another, or had never experienced in this way. And I suppose I sometimes think there are light bulb moments when people say those things. And if I'm honest, this was not something I had really thought about or focused much when I first came into the work with Broadreach. I had not really thought about the impact of working in these different places and spaces and what that would mean. And it's through these experiences, I think, that I've begun to see how a more reciprocal and hospitable relationship between people, between place and space grows. And to recognise how important it is to have the right to be creatively active, the right to move in different public places and spaces, and the right to dance, if you wish, when you wish, in different places. And in this, the need to create access, particularly as we age, when people are perhaps less able, perhaps more vulnerable, less independent becomes vital. And the importance, thus, for doors to remain open for institutions, for organisations, for public buildings and spaces to maintain a degree of flexibility in the way they operate and function, so that they can respond to the changing needs of communities as they themselves change, grow older, or indeed rejuvenate. And how over time, and yes, because we age, this can help build a deep-rooted sense, I believe, of attachment, of community, of cultural ownership, and of belonging. And it's not always easy to be hospitable. Neither, I think, is it easy to be always hospitable, but I guess I feel both are feasible and both are really important in creating hospitable spaces, in creating hospitable communities, and to be able to move and dance as we wish, when we wish, if we wish, at any age. Thank you.